On the morning of August 26, 2025, 10 police officers walked onto a rural property in Victoria, Australia, to serve a warrant. Within minutes, 2 of them were dead. The man they were looking for disappeared into the bush behind his home. He would not be seen again for 7 months. It would become one of the largest manhunts in Australian history. And when it finally ended, the questions it left behind were almost stranger than the manhunt itself. He was born Desmond Christopher Philby. He dropped out of school around age 13 and spent much of his life on the Victoria-New South Wales border. People who knew him young described someone who simply could not take direction from anyone in authority. At some point, he renamed himself Desi Freeman, a name chosen by his own account as a symbol of personal sovereignty. He lived on a 20-hectare property outside the small town of Porapunka with his wife, Molly, and their children, in buses, behind gates, under security cameras. Locals described it as looking less like a home and more like a compound. In 2018, the Freemans appeared on Australian television complaining about noisy neighbors. A neighbor at the time called them very kind, very beautiful people. Years later, a different neighboring family would tell reporters the Freemans had put them through hell. In court, Freeman referred to police as Nazis and terrorist thugs. He once tried, representing himself, to place a magistrate and police officers under citizen's arrest. A judge would later note, dryly, that he had a history of unpleasant encounters with police. Australian federal police had flagged the sovereign citizen movement itself years earlier as something with an underlying capacity to inspire violence. They had no way of knowing how literally that warning was about to be tested. On the morning of August 26, 2025, 10 officers arrived at Freeman's property. Among them were members of the Sexual Offenses and Child Investigation Team. They were there to execute a search warrant tied to allegations of historical sex offenses. It was meant to be a search, a legal process carried out by officers doing their jobs. Freeman had other plans. Freeman opened fire with a homemade shotgun. 2 officers, Senior Constables Neil Thompson and Vadim DeWart, were killed. A 3rd officer was wounded. In the chaos, Freeman armed himself further, reportedly taking weapons from the officers he'd just shot, and fled on foot into the dense bushland of Mount Buffalo National Park. Police warned the public he was heavily armed and he was considered extremely dangerous. Porapunka is a small town, the kind of place where a manhunt like this had never happened before. Police imposed a no-fly zone over the area. Residents were told to stay indoors. Tourists heading to the nearby ski fields were warned to stay away. Journalists covering the story were warned about the risk of operating anywhere near the search zone. Hundreds of officers combed the bush. Dogs, helicopters. Reinforcements pulled in from every Australian state and territory, and from across the Tasman Sea from New Zealand. More than 2,000 tips and leads would eventually come in. Online, theories multiplied by the day. Some believed Freeman had been flown out through a nearby airfield. Some thought he'd vanished deep enough into the bush that he'd simply never be found. A few even speculated he'd somehow made it out of the country entirely to South Africa. Nobody actually knew. About a week into the search, police said something that changed the shape of the entire manhunt. They believed Freeman wasn't surviving out there alone. Investigators suspected he was receiving help. Food, shelter, information from sympathizers within the surrounding community. People who agreed with what he believed, even after what he'd done. Police opened a mobile information center in the nearby town of Bright, trying to give people a way to come forward. One officer, addressing the public directly, said simply, "We're looking for a person who killed 2 people." For months, that appeal went largely unanswered. On March 20th, 2026, 7 months after the shooting, police found him. Not in the wilderness surrounding Porepunka, nearly 200 kilometers away, at a rural property in the state's northeast, hiding in a makeshift shelter, described as something between a shipping container and a long caravan. A 3-hour standoff followed. Officers say he had the opportunity to surrender peacefully. He didn't take it. Police shot and killed him. Victoria's police commissioner said they believe the shooting was justified, though an investigation into exactly what happened remained ongoing. What nobody could fully explain was how he'd gotten 200 kilometers from where he'd vanished. Investigators said plainly, they believed people had helped him get there. Detective leading Senior Constable Neil Thompson and Senior Constable Vadim DeWart didn't come home from a routine warrant. Their deaths were the reason 2,000 tips came in. The reason a small alpine town spent months looking over its shoulder. Freeman's death didn't end the story the way an arrest might have. Within his own network of fellow sovereign citizens and the people believed to have helped hide him, his beliefs didn't die with him. Many of them, researchers would later find, kept believing in exactly the same ideas that led him to open fire on 10 officers serving a routine warrant. The sovereign citizen movement didn't start in Australia, but Desi Freeman's case put it in headlines there like nothing before it had. He renamed himself in the name of personal sovereignty. In the end, sovereignty didn't save him. It just meant he decided at the very last moment that he'd rather die than answer to anyone at all.